Hello, it is my privilege to be here today, and I would like to acknowledge the invitation by the ASM Emerging Professionals Committee, which made it possible for me to present this talk. My name is Richard Otis, and I'm here to talk about high-impact work, what it is, and how you can do more of it. To give you a summary up front, we're going to talk about three things: that great work and high-impact work are related but distinct things, the idea that words and actions are not the same as thoughts and feelings, and adopting a portfolio-oriented approach to your professional life. We conclude with an emphasis on the importance of mentorship and a call to action to ask someone you admire about their mentor for reasons which will become clear during the talk. Now, before we can talk about impact, we have to talk about science and engineering at a higher level than we typically do. Science in the popular imagination is often conceived of as a static edifice with gaps slowly filled in by the diligent work of professionals. This is epitomized in entertainment through the technology tree metaphor, present in many popular historically themed strategy games. This idea implies that all technology is preordained by nature, and it is simply up to scientists and engineers to discover it, to figure it out. Time and money enter into the left-hand side of the equation, and new discoveries emerge from the right-hand side, like a chemical reaction, right? What's interesting to note about this understanding is two things. The first, that human beings are largely absent. At best, we're interchangeable cogs in a technology machine. And second, science and technology are monotonically increasing functions of time. That is to say, technological regression is impossible. I'd like to offer an alternative perspective. Science and technology are sandcastles built on the beach. Our discoveries, our knowledge, our civilization is a dynamic equilibrium between knowledge creation and knowledge decay. Knowledge decay, in most cases, is not directly a human-driven process, but is simply a consequence of both time and our systems for conducting research. That is, students graduate, people change jobs or retire, data and metadata are misplaced or disappear. This analogy is also imperfect, but it gets at the core intuition for the research enterprise, which is the natural state of technology is decay, and our discoveries, if left unmaintained, will simply be washed away over time. In this understanding, human beings become an essential part of the scientific enterprise, and new discoveries are not simply a matter of time and money. In this understanding, how we choose to conduct research matters, because how we choose to organize our research affects not only the knowledge creation rate, but also our ability to slow the natural decay of existing knowledge. Now we can ask, do the castles have to be made of sand? That is, can knowledge be encoded in a way that makes it more robust? We can ask, can we build a seawall? That is, can knowledge decay processes be slowed through some kind of systematic reform? This idea gets to my core critique of contemporary research, which is that we have research programs which are fixated on the architecture of sandcastles, yet not very interested in approaches for mitigating encroaching tides. This talk is not meant to be a policy prescription for science, but you absolutely need this context if you're trying to understand what it means to make an impact. Now, ideas repeat all the time. It's almost a cliche to say that no one ever does anything novel, but what causes some ideas to grow and proliferate and others to die? When I was an undergraduate at Georgia Tech, I was taught professional ethics not by a scientist or an engineer, but by an historian of science. And an interesting thing happens when you start looking at science and technology through the lens of history. Many seemingly inevitable technical decisions fall away, and you see human agency, human decision-making everywhere. You know how sometimes people say an idea was before its time? That means it was a political failure. There was a failure to connect the value of the idea to the systems of the time. And this gets to the core difference between great work and high-impact work. The greatness of a particular work, now we can say that all work has an inherent quality to it. We may not be able to collectively agree on what it is, but it's there. So in a sense, great work can stand alone. However, that does not mean that it'll make an impact. Making an impact on your field requires other people. Why? We just went through how human beings are an essential part of the research enterprise. Great work is the beautifully engineered analysis program, which reproduces the results of your latest paper. High impact work, on the other hand, is the documentation and packaging of that program, and the public advocacy you do, and the interactive tutorials you organize to help make that program useful to others. Impact is everything you do about your work which is in the service of your peers' improved understanding of why your work is important to them. As someone who has led award-winning scientific software development teams, impact has a little to do with smart design and writing good code, but a lot to do with effective storytelling. And so I encourage you to construct, either in a notebook or just in your head, a catalog or portfolio of the work you do, along with two axes: perceived importance of the work and also its visibility. And visibility can mean different things depending on whether you're in academia, government, or an industry, but it's really a shorthand for the things you are doing to raise awareness and advocate for the work. The key thing to understand is that tasks can move around on the axes. Importance increases or falls away as you learn, and visibility can shift as external priorities change. Researchers and technologists should strive to maintain a balance across these axes, because not every task can be high visibility, and importance is sometimes not apparent at the beginning of a work. I'd like now to talk a little bit about storytelling in the context of career. If you don't mind, I'd like to read you a poem by one of the most famous American poets, a poem with which, if you happen to receive your early education in the US, you will surely be familiar. The poem is called The Road Not Taken and was written by Robert Frost. It starts, "Two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both, and be one traveler long I stood, and looked one as far as I could, to where it bent in the undergrowth. Then took the other, as just as fair, and having perhaps the better claim, because it was grassy and wanted wear, though as for the passing there, had worn them really about the same. And both the morning equally lay, and leaves no step had trodden black. Oh, I kept the first for another day, yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. I shall be telling this with a sigh somewhere, ages and ages hence. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference." The last stanza of this poem is so famous it's a cliche to say I took the road less traveled, but did you catch the trick the narrator is playing on you? I'll give you a moment to think. The two roads were completely indistinguishable. The passing there has worn them really about the same, but that wasn't the story the narrator wanted to tell. Human beings crave narratives, especially pioneer narratives. That is why the famous last stanza is prefixed with, "I shall be telling this with a sigh somewhere ages and ages hence." What actually happened in the woods is besides the point. The point was that the story became core to the narrator's identity. The Paris Review wrote an article in 2015 called "The Most Misread Poem in America" about exactly this idea. The daily lives of real people include dead ends and false starts, but human beings crave narratives. So your life is not a thing that happens to you. For better or worse, it's a story that you create. In fact, many stories are important to your life. There is the story you tell yourself about you, so we call that identity. There's the story your peers tell each other about you, which is your reputation. And one working definition of success really is when these stories strongly overlap or converge, when you are able to get your peers to see you exactly the way you see yourself. You may argue that there are other ingredients to success, but it's hard to imagine feeling successful otherwise. So, if it's a problem to get career advice from talks like this because post hoc rationalization can be so powerful, what can we do? This is where mentorship becomes really valuable and important. I do want to acknowledge the efforts of the ASM Emerging Professionals Committee to connect members with mentorship opportunities, and I strongly encourage you to connect with the EPC if you are interested in mentorship on either side, as a mentor or mentee. And when you as a mentee reach out to your mentor, I encourage you to ask them about someone they admire, who they worked with closely. I will start with an example of my own. I was a student of Professor Zikwe Liu at Penn State for about 4 years, in a time when he was transitioning from mid-career to senior faculty. Professor Liu is someone who doesn't need an introduction to this audience, perhaps, as he's a past president of the society, but to hit just a few highlights, he's graduated about 30 PhD students, published over 500 papers, is a recipient of numerous awards, internationally recognized for his expertise in thermodynamics of materials. Now, it wouldn't surprise you for me to say that he is a brilliant scholar, but there are many brilliant people who do not necessarily achieve this level of recognition in the community. So, what makes him different? Professor Liu gives his own success talk, which I fully agree with and I won't replicate here, but I'd like to note 3 concrete things I have observed about Professor Liu and other high-achieving people I have worked closely with. I believe these observations are less susceptible to bias than me speaking purely from personal experience, and is less affected by the rationalizing I talked about earlier. The first is that they treat physical health with the same seriousness as mental health, to include daily exercise. The second is that they are organized really to a fault, including detailed note-taking for meetings and a well-kept calendar. This enables them to plan and respond to more events than they can fit in their short-term working memory. The third is that they have a sophisticated understanding of the sources of institutional power. Now, this last one requires a bit of explanation. High-achieving people seem to understand, either intuitively or overtly, that one can leverage institutions as part of their own professional storytelling. And so they choose to contribute their own time and labor in the service of institutional power. Many people refer to this derisively as playing the game or being Machiavellian, but the reality is that this is a profoundly human-centric thing to do. All institutions are, in a sense, collective delusions. ASM exists, culturally speaking, because we all agree that it does. Now, if that's true, where does this belief come from? And this is where it becomes clear why traditions and rituals are important. Things like an annual picnic, or a banquet, or an award ceremony are a way of communicating a shared understanding about who we are and why we are. Contributing to this shared understanding is one way to build a legacy. So you see, there is no impact without your peers. It's not enough to claim the inherent quality of a work. High impact work requires engagement with your colleagues, your institutions, your professional societies. You can't assume your work will simply speak for itself. Papers and code don't talk. People do. I think many scientists are too hesitant to put their hands on the levers of institutional power and somehow see scientific endeavors as above it. But make no mistake, science and technology development are political activities because they are human activities. And if you choose not to engage, you are letting others determine the framework by which you and your work will be judged. And this may or may not work out in your favor. Great work stands alone, but you need the support of your peer community to make an impact. Thank you.